What's going on, everyone? John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo here, and I've got the privilege of being joined by Nick Lee. And you might not know his face yet, but I'm willing to bet you know the breadth of his work. Most recently got a ton of attention because of this guy, which enables him to run Android on his iPhone. Nick, thanks for spending the time with us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about this project and what it is, and a little bit more about yourself and kind of what got you to here.
Sure. Well, I've been playing around with the iOS platform in its various states pretty much since before there was even an official SDK. And I've always kind of been a hacker in that regard. I've always been interested in getting into the inner workings of things. And kind of the inspiration for this was just the great animosity that exists between the two mobile operating system camps. And I knew that kind of mashing them together in a particularly unattractive package would definitely turn some heads and raise some eyebrows.
So you mentioned hacking. You got some notoriety very early on. Your first app that went to the App Store, people might still have it on their phone.
I built an app called Handy Light for the iPhone, which was a flashlight app that had a hidden tethering feature. So it had some very strange sequence to get that going. You had to punch in the colors in a certain order.
Like Simon, right?
Something like that, yeah. If you picked them in the right order, the screen would turn purple and it would turn on the built-in tethering. And yeah, I emailed all the tech blogs about it, and it kind of blew up overnight, and Apple pulled it, and 5 a.m. calls came in from Apple Legal, and it was scary.
That's fun. And you're also the genius behind putting Windows 95 on an Apple Watch.
I wouldn't say genius. I would I would say insane person. But yeah, that was a lot of fun too. Basically, what I was going for there was I was trying to figure out if there were ways around the limitations Apple puts on what you can do with a watch app, and that enabled me to actually basically use the Apple Watch as an emulator, because once I had the ability to use the screen for touch input and the ability to draw graphics on the screen, you can do whatever you want.
So tell us a little bit about this. So if people haven't seen it, this is running Android on an iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of YouTube commenters their opinions may differ, but for all intents and purposes, yeah, you can use the Android operating system on your iPhone, and you can switch between the two operating systems as if you were switching between apps on your phone.
So how did you do it? What's in here? Is it emulation? Are you remote accessing?
The most analogous thing to it is remote access, and I can crack it open here, and I can kind of give you a little tour.
So 3D printed your own case, sort of.
Yeah, 3D printed it. Never did 3D printing before. Took an Uber to B&H, bought the cheapest 3D printer I could find. Printed a lot of really bad, kind of screwed up cases before I got to this one.
And did you take inspiration from the iPhone 6 battery case?
A little bit. I was really thinking, my initial plan was to gut a Mophie, because they were roughly the right thickness. But I think it would have been really hard to fit all the stuff in there, so I ended up just printing my own. So what's
inside?
Okay, so we basically there's not a lot of components in here. Most obvious one is probably this battery here. It uses a lot of power because this board isn't actually designed to run off a battery, so it doesn't have the same kind of power management features that a modern Android phone would have. But basically, we have 3 boards in here. We have a battery charger, which is connected via this switch to a voltage booster. This battery is running at 3.7 volts, and this board requires at least 8 volts to operate. So when we flip this switch, the voltage booster gets connected to the battery, and it bumps the voltage up from 3.7 volts to 8 volts, which goes into this Android system on module. And the interesting thing about this one, it's called the High Key by a company called LeMaker. The interesting thing about this one is, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only development board that is officially supported by Google's Android open source project. And what that means is that there's clear documentation for how to get Android running on this thing. There's a lot of other boards kind of like this, but the documentation's kind of scattered between forums and random GitHub repositories, and it was pretty easy to get up and running with this one.
So once you had Android up and running on the board, how do you get it on the phone?
Sure. So getting Android running on the board was actually really easy. The absolute coolest thing about Android that is a real benefit it has over iOS is that the entire operating system, with the exception of Google's apps, meaning the Play Store and that stuff, is open source. And that means you can just download it and you can build it on your computer. And you can make modifications to the operating system and install them on a phone. So that's actually where I started, and I started with a normal Android phone. I didn't have this board yet. I think I used a Nexus 5. There's two components. The first one is you need to figure out how to communicate with the iPhone. Apple's protocol that they use for Lightning is proprietary. And typically to use it, you have to get what's called an MFI license. And I figured they probably weren't gonna, even though I have an MFI account, they probably weren't gonna let me keep it after doing something like this. So this is just like standard Lightning. There's an open source project called USB MUX-D that allows you basically to send network connections over Lightning. So what I did is I ported that to Android, which wasn't particularly difficult because Android uses a Linux kernel.
I love how you say not particularly difficult. Like, this sounds like you just made a rocket ship that can fly to Jupiter.
It was more difficult than the average kind of building your own website. But sure. in the grand scheme of things, modifying an operating system, it was surprisingly easy to get going. The second thing was actually figuring out how to capture the screen on the Android side of things. Because it has to be relatively performant if it's going to try to get anywhere near kind of the 60 frame per second magic smooth number of frame rate. So that's another thing that runs on this is a small a process that captures the screen in the background and just fires it off out of the USB port and receives the touch events in. And I suppose the final component is the iPhone app, which just listens for incoming frames and sends touches out.
So the phone itself is not jailbroken?
Not jailbroken. It's running the latest version of iOS 9, or one of the most recent ones. And yeah, it's a normal app. Honestly, you could probably ship this app through the App Store. It doesn't use any private APIs or anything.
See how long Apple would would allow that. So what's the plan for this? Was it just to prove that you could?
Yeah, the plan was really to get people talking about it. It's like I said before, the animosity between the platforms is so great that it was low-hanging fruit.
As somebody who's been on YouTube for a while, I can attest.
As somebody who's read the comments on the video for this.
So treating this as a working proof of concept.
Yeah,
it could
it's
be
a
modified,
prototype.
Could be slimmed down, to ultimately be Android on your iPhone for all intents and purposes with the case.
For sure, yeah. I could see this, if we actually wanted to go to like real production with this, I could see this being about the size of the Apple battery case in terms of form factor.
And once it's running, is it fully functioning Android?
Yeah, more or less. There are certain things that don't work. There's no camera. But other than that...
Are those limitations that could be overcome?
Probably, yeah. There's no cellular modem in it either, but you don't really need that because you can just use your phone.
Yeah. Nick, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Now that you guys know what went into this, I assume you want to see it actually work. We have a whole video detailing this actually running. Seeing Android running on an iPhone is like seeing a cat with a dog tail. It is incredible to see, and the fact that it's actually working on a non-jailbroken iPhone is like magic. So if you want to see that, we'll link to it down below. We'll link it up here. Give it a check out. Nick, thank you again for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.